Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and good evening as well. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Tshwane Naidu. I'm a green building specialist with UNEP, also supporting the Global ABC. Just a brief introduction about the Global ABC. The Global ABC is a leading platform for all stakeholders committed to a common vision, which is a zero emission, efficient and resilient buildings and construction sector. With 339 members, including 43 countries, the Global ABC aims to be a global advocate and a catalyst to action through the coordination and implementation of the Buildings Breakthrough and the Intergovernmental Council for Buildings and Climate, which was established and institutionalized last year. It is also a trusted platform to track progress, which is done through our Global Status Report. And we also support countries in setting priorities through developing roadmaps and provision of guidance on integrating the building sector into their NDCs. And of course, we also support the private sector transition by engaging with them through our hubs and action groups. The Global ABC hubs and action groups serve as channels for members and partners to engage. To date, the Global ABC has 7 hubs and 3 action groups that work on various thematic priorities. And today we have the opportunity to learn and engage with the Data Hub, which is chaired by Dr. Jörg Ostermeier from Q's Analytics, and also Ursula Hartenberger, who's the Secretary General of the Climate Positive European Alliance. Today's topic is something that's extremely close to my heart personally, which is on building energy codes in the Global South. And it's truly my privilege to moderate and facilitate the session. As we all know, building energy codes are amongst the most effective tools for curbing operational emissions. As of 2024, there are 85 and 88 countries that have adopted national building energy codes for residential and non-residential buildings respectively, out of which 80% are mandatory. These codes play a crucial role in reducing energy consumption, which is significant given that the buildings sector is a major consumer of energy globally. There have been a few quick wins in the recent times. For example, Kenya's building code introduces and advocates for energy-saving materials and technologies, and also promotes renewable energy. And in Nigeria as well, Laos State's forthcoming building code is set to be introduced in 2025 that establishes high-performance standards to drive energy efficiency. Implementing and enforcing building energy codes in emerging economies presents itself as an opportunity not just to mitigate climate change, but to also increase energy security. Despite some progress, the amount of new construction still not covered by the building energy codes remains a major concern, and we need innovative solutions to bridge this gap. That being said, I will now call on Jörg to introduce the Data Hub and our distinguished speakers. Thank you very much. Jörg, over to you.
Konish, thank you very much. Yeah, welcome everybody to this webinar of the Global ABC Data Hub. As Konish has said, the hubs in the Global ABC are the vehicles by which members come together and to join work. I have the privilege to chair the Data Hub together with my colleague Ursula Hartenberger. I'm Professor for Energy and Building Data at University College London, so the topic of data is especially close to my heart. And what is our hopes for the webinar today? Well, it's bluntly to bring together stakeholders around the built environment who are interested in more robust, more transparent, and more comparable data to improve their daily work. If there is one working hypothesis we have in the Data Hub, it's that better data typically leads to better decisions. An exchange with other stakeholders working on the same topic typically leads to more efficient learning and processes. So it is our hope that the presentation we are going to see soon on really impressive work on covering the existing energy codes in the Global South will hopefully help the participants to get a better overview over what has been done somewhere else, and hopefully get in touch and start interacting on the database, which is the result of the work that we have that we are about to see. That said, the structure of the meeting today is a relatively simple and straightforward one. We will hear a short introduction of Professor Laubscher, and then maybe some convening words of Professor Visscher, and then Dr. Tariené Gaum will go into depth and really looking into the work and present it in detail. Obviously, it is not possible to present 3 years of work in 30 minutes, but we will do our best. This will be followed by questions that we will moderate. So please, if you have questions, write them in the chat. We will continuously scope the chat. Try to bring similar questions together and then post them after the presentation to the speakers. If your question cannot be answered in this presentation, be sure that we will send the speakers a complete list of questions so they might get in touch afterwards, so that we really maximize the value of this presentation for all of you. This meeting will be recorded, so you will also have access to the recording afterwards. Again, we really try to be a platform to bring stakeholders and their respective interests together. And if a number of you go out of this meeting with either having some new insights, having some new contacts, or having then access to some resources which is helpful for their daily work, then we feel we did a good job and this was totally worth it. So that said, I would like to quickly introduce our 3 speakers. First handing over to Professor Laubscher, who is the supervisor of the work we are going to see. He will give some initial introduction into the work and where it is coming from. I am just informed that we have some trouble connecting Professor Henk Visscher, so we need to see whether you, Jacques, maybe can cover his part as well. This is the typical technical problems. I think he's in South Korea at the moment, so he is not at his home desk. And then we will give the floor to Dr. Tariené Gaum, who is the main source of all the information you're going to see, and kick us off into hopefully a good discussion. Jacques, with that said, may I hand over to you?
Thank you very much, Jörg. I'll start by sharing my screen. Please let me know if it's legible. Jörg, I presume you can all see my screen.
Not me.
I'll try again. Okay, on my end it says I am sharing the screen. Antara, perhaps you can just check?
No, it's not visible to me either. I will share the screen from my end. Just give me 1 minute, please.
Okay, then.
Sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone. Just give me a minute.
Working now for me?
Yes, you can see the screen now.
Professor Laubscher, when you want me to go to the next slide, please say next.
Okay, I'll make sure that I can now see your screen because I'm only seeing all the attendees. Okay, Antara, I can see I can't display your I can't see your display, but I'll do this without that then. Firstly, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Hello again to everyone. My name is Jacques Laubscher, and it's a privilege to share this presentation with you. I'm also very honored to share this platform with Tariené and Henk, and we're excited to share our work. If we go to the next slide, the presentation outline covers 10 topics. Firstly, we will look at an overview of the global platform to identify the problem and explore global energy efficiency and sustainability challenges. Then we will identify the location of the Global South. We will look at the major Global South challenges, identifying the key obstacles and hurdles. The most prominent Global South role players will be identified through 3 criteria, and the status of the building energy and efficiency codes in 57 countries follows next. The Global South's mandatory BEEC organization structure is analyzed, and under item 7, we will discuss lessons learned from a comparison of Global North and Global South BEEC frameworks. Item 8, we will look at the insight from this comparison contributing to the evolution of the Global South model. Under item 9, the Energy Efficiency Criteria Organization will explore how energy efficiency can be systematically arranged to aid in decision-making. The structure of the decision-making prototype, or SLIM3, is introduced as part of item 10. It's followed by 2 practical examples. Firstly, a case study of developing existing building energy efficiency codes in South Africa. And then secondly, a case study will be presented on developing new building energy efficiency codes for the built environment of Angola. Here, we will showcase the contextual relevance of using the SLIM3 approach. The summary under item 11 will recap the major points that we've discussed in the webinar, and under item 12, we'll do closing remarks and final thoughts. Antara, if we could go to the next slide. Buildings are directly linked to climate change due to their significant carbon emissions that are associated both with their construction and ongoing operations. And in preparing for this lecture, or this webinar rather, I looked again at the Global Status Report for Buildings and Construction that was released last year. The built environment, as we know, is responsible for approximately 34% of global energy consumption. Next slide. Its CO2 emissions reached record levels in 2022. And according to the 24 report, it contributed to nearly 37% rather, of the total global CO2 emissions. In other words, on a global scale, these statistics highlight the built environment as a key driver of climate change and its challenges. Extreme weather events worldwide continue to escalate. Therefore, the impact of the built environment is impossible to overlook. It's also important in the Global South, where the vulnerability of communities is of growing concern. Next slide. The first part, when reviewing building energy efficiency codes in the Global South, it becomes clear that we have a knowledge gap and that there is a need for the development of building energy efficiency codes. Enter, the real-world problem was addressed in our research by creating a comprehensive database of mandatory building energy efficiency codes that are implemented across the entire built environment by Global South countries. This database served as the foundation for developing a new framework that informed a model and ultimately the context-specific decision-making tool. The purpose of this tool is to assist Global South countries in reducing energy consumption and CO2 emissions, especially in its built environment. And ultimately, it will also help prepare the Global South for the adverse impacts of climate change. The outcome of this research is the Sustainable Level Indicator Model, Matrix, and Maps, which we also call the SLIM3 tool. The SLIM3 tool is already available as an interactive online platform, but it's currently still in its first developmental phase. Next slide. Scholars and politicians...
Sorry, please skip 2 slides. Sorry, please skip 2 slides. We are now on with the Global South.
Slide 7.
Yes, thank you.
Antara, perhaps if I say enter, because I've structured the slides to different headings also, if you could just press enter then. So the question here is, where is the Global South? And scholars and politicians use this term to describe economically disadvantaged countries, developing countries, or even third world countries. Although these countries are primarily located in the Southern Hemisphere, this term Global South remains contested. When we compare it to the Global North, the Global South could be described as nations which are often characterized by higher poverty rates, a lower GDP per capita, and challenges surrounding its infrastructure, education, and health care. Also, they sometimes have an unstable political power structure. Next slide. So in our research, it was necessary to make a clear distinction between what is Global North and what is Global South. The Bront line is a visualization that was created in 1980. It highlighted global inequalities and the socioeconomic divide that separates the North and the South. The original Bront line consists of 141 countries. It's a valuable reference, and it indicates which countries form part of the Global South. But at the same time, several studies have questioned the relevance of these Global South member countries. Next slide. Antara, here, when I say enter, you can just press enter because there are 3 points here. This image presents a reinterpretation of the 1980 Bront line, and we've adapted it based on current literature, research, economic indicators, and political perspectives. Antara, if you could press enter. So the first one was the original Bront line, which had 141 countries. Enter again. The second part was the 2022 UN World Economic Situation and Prospects, or WESP report, which looked at 125 so-called developing economies. Antara, enter again. And then thirdly, we have the group of 77, also termed G77 and China, which currently includes 134 countries. So the above 3 source documents were consulted in updating the Bront line. In certain instances, the classification of a country changed. Some nations have either improved their economies to become emerging or developed, or have joined G77, and they've transitioned between Global North and South. Countries were included in our study if they were mentioned in at least 2 of the 3 classification documents. And as a result, we now have 135 Global South countries that form part of the study's population. Next slide, slide 10. The climate change challenges faced by the built environment of each Global South country can be related to the prevalent socioeconomic circumstances, the varying the varying climatic conditions, and the built environment legislation. Next slide. Amtara, is the chord diagram playing automatically? I want to make sure.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Great. I'll again ask you to enter. So this chord diagram summarizes the 4 primary climate change challenges. Through this diagram, we attempt to highlight the complex relationships and connections between different factors. But these factors are all relevant to the built environment and specifically to Global South countries. So 4 key questions guided the content of the chord diagram. Antara, if you could enter. Firstly, we asked what are the socioeconomic conditions of each Global South country? And this question is partially addressed when we looked at the projected 2050 urban population of each country. Enter again. So secondly, the total CO2 emissions of each country can be related directly to the extent of its built environment. Enter. The third aspect is the distinctive climatic zones and conditions of the Global South countries. And these are outlined in the updated Copenhagen map. Enter, please. And then fourthly, we looked at the built environment legislation. More particularly, we asked which countries have BEECs, building energy efficiency codes or similar regulations, and then in which sectors of the built environment are these BEECs utilized. It is widely accepted that the impact of climate change will increase if we don't have significant strategies that we are implementing. Building energy efficiency regulatory criteria could then be used as a tool to help address these expected climate change challenges. At the same time, increased natural disasters such as droughts, floods, rising sea levels, biodiversity losses, and devastating wildfires have already impacted over 55 million people until 2022. As I said earlier, this is especially challenging for the impoverished and unprotected populations of the Global South. Next slide. The Global South countries need to develop energy efficiency policies for their built environments. If we looked at the projected built environment, the Global South is projected to almost double its global built floor space by 2050. This phenomenon is primarily driven by urbanization. When we consider that a typical building lasts 60 years and people spend approximately 90% of their lives in a building, it means that the buildings that we are constructing today will influence carbon emissions, energy use, and the health of its occupants for the next 60 years or more. This means it will extend well into the 2080s. It is therefore necessary to identify the major Global South role players. Eventually, a total of 57 countries formed part of this study, and their selection was based on 3 criteria: their projected 2050 urban population, the CO2 emission rates, and distinctive climatic zones. Next slide, please. The global population reached nearly 8.2 million by mid last year. At the same time, we need to remember this number is expected to grow by another 2 billion over the next 60 years, peaking at around 10.3 billion in the mid-2080s. When we consider urban population growth, the Global South again is expected to experience the most significant urban growth. And those countries were included in this model. The expansion of building stock is closely linked to urbanization, and as a result, building energy consumption, which includes embodied and operational energy, is expected to increase accordingly. The study focused on Global South countries with an urban population of 18 million people or more per city, or for their cities, and 48 of the 135 Global South countries met this criterion, representing 91% of the Global South urban population and nearly 75% of the world's projected 2050 urban population. We can move to the next slide, Antara. The model, as I said earlier, was developed also using the highest CO2 emitting countries of the Global South. 48 countries were identified, and these 48 were compared with the 48 countries with the projected 2050 population, urban population rather, exceeding 18 million people. So these 48 countries that we see listed here represents 97% of the Global South CO2 emissions and nearly 52% of the world's total CO2 emissions. 9 additional countries were identified when we compared the two that did not fall in the highest urban population projections, and this increased the study population to 57 countries. If we move on to the next slide, we also use the Köppen-Geiger climate classification to categorize the Global South's climatic zones. The selected countries had to present these distinctive climatic zones and types that were classified by Köppen-Geiger. When we look at the 57 countries that formed part of the study, they represented all 5 climate zones and 29 of the possible 31 climate types. We move on to slide 16. Here, Antara, we again have transitions. This figure visually represents the 57 Global South countries that were included in the study. It offers us a comprehensive view, and it's based on the selection criteria. So the first enter, the countries account, as I said earlier, for nearly 94% of the projected 2050 urban population of the Global South, and at the same time, approximately 40% of that of the world. Enter again, Antara. The selected 57 countries are responsible for approximately 97% of CO2 emissions in the Global South, and this is also approximately 40% of the total global emissions. Enter, please. In terms of the Köppen-Geiger classification, the selected 57 falls within all 5 climatic zones and 29 of the 31 climate types. And then lastly, when we consider population statistics alone, the 57 countries account for approximately 42% of the Global South population and 29.2% of the overall worldwide population. We move on to the next slide. So when we ask what is the status of BEECs in these 57 countries, we examined what building energy efficiency codes were available in each country. We move on to the next slide. In this slide, we have a geographic overview of the status of the building energy codes in the 57 countries. The countries with BEECs that are compulsory to its entire built environment are indicated in green. And these are only 18 of the 57 countries. I emphasize again, here we have building energy efficiency codes and it's implemented or mandatory over the entire built environment, not only for selected categories or sectors. And we use these 18 compulsory BEECs to develop our Global South model. And to summarize then, only 51% of the study selected countries have implemented mandatory building energy codes across its sectors. The 49% have not adapted any codes, and this is really concerning for us. If we move on to the next slide. So the reductory framework that we are proposing is the result of taxonomy, ontology, and systems thinking that we use to review the structure and the scope of the mandatory 18 BEECs. If we go to the next slide, Tariené developed what is called a hierarchy of building element framework. We shortened this to HOBEF. It's a systems dynamics approach that was used to inform HOBEF. Level 1 focuses on the goals or the building as a whole. The objectives of level 2 are aimed at the specific building systems, and systems include the building envelope, HVAC, services, and renewables, amongst others. Level 3 consists of building subsystems and their functional requirements. And these are glazing, heating, cooling, ventilation, etc. Level 4 describes the building components and individual building elements, for example, walls, floors, roofs, and shading. We move on to the next slide, please. In level 5, we looked at performance criteria, technical specifications, or specific attributes. And now we distinguished also between level 5A and level 5B. And here it was about the performance requirements and the compliance methods. I'll come back to this a bit later. And level 6 looked at prescriptive solutions and how we could apply then the SLIM 3 model using Global South examples. So if we move to the next slide, here we can see the systems dynamic approach facilitated the harmonization of different building energy efficiency codes across the Global South. We had to develop this framework in order to compare the codes, because without this framework, it was really difficult to filter through all these codes. So we wanted to ensure consistency and effective analysis. So the HOBEF organized the existing built environment of the Global South into various systems, subsystems, and individual elements. As I said, there are 6 levels of HOBEF, and those are presented here holistically. Tara, if we could move to the next slide, please. Our research focus remains the Global South. At the same time, it's also necessary to study what's happening in the Global North. And the purpose of this is to understand the underlying Global North approaches and how those could influence the building energy efficiency codes of the Global South. We can move to the next slide. Here, Professor would have spoken a bit about the seminal work that was done at the Technical University of Delft. So on the left-hand side, one of the Global North models is the Sheridan, Visscher, and Meyer model. And then in the center is also the Nordic 5-level model. So Sheridan, Visscher, and Meyer were the first to attempt to categorize coding and regulations in the built environment.
Short interruption. I think Henk is in the call, so I think he could take over.
Henk.
I'm here. Yeah.
Well, amazing.
I had a bit of struggle to get in, but yeah. So maybe not too much to interrupt the presentation of Jacques. I'm very happy that it is used. The work that we did, I think more than 20 years ago, comparing the European systems of building regulations and building control, try to organize it a bit in a kind of system thinking, also referring to models that were built before, like the Nordic model. I think there are various ways that you can build up the regulations. Also, in another country, in another context, there might be reasons to organize things differently. The use of this model is mainly to better understand that there are different strategies to formulate regulations. And that's comparing the level of regulations from one country to another is not as easy as you might think from a distance, because first you have to understand the system of it. And I think, well, please go on, Jacques. Tell us how you used it in the way you want to analyze the existing structures in the Global South.
Thank you, Henk. So on the right-hand side of the triangle, the triangular shape, you can see how we are showcasing the HOBEF model. If we could move on to the next slide. As Henk said, it's very difficult even in Europe with a more homogeneous built environment to compare the different regulations. So the result of this comparison and the study up to now is a new framework that combines the global north and the global south approaches, and it offers worldwide benefits. If we could go to slide 26 on Tara. Here you see the new sustainable level indicator or SLI model on and how the different levels are now showcased. On level 5, as I said earlier, we have two possible compliance methods, and this we've seen in the global north and global south, where compliance takes place through meeting prescriptive or performance criteria. And the SLI model enables the formulation now of generalizable decision-making principles. If we could move to the next slide, please. So during the next developmental stage, the SLI model was applied to the pertinent energy efficiency criteria. Next slide. And the criteria of the Global South BEECs were divided into 4 levels, where level 1 is the technical requirements, level 2, the six categories, which included the type of BEECs, the building classifications of climatic zones, the building envelope and energy performance, HVAC. 5th were services, and 6 were renewable energy and alternative technologies. Levels 3 and 4, as you can see, provides more detailed information in these 6 categories. Next slide, please. So the technical requirements, they were structured or restructured again to inform what we now will have is a SLI matrix. And this is what you see here. We're now seeing the 18 Global South countries, the BEECs or Building Energy Efficiency Codes that they have, and we see that in the different categories. So on a horizontal level, the BEEC categories of each country are summarized, and you'll see right to the on the right hand
Next
side.
slide, please. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Tariené. On the right hand side, you'll see the number of building energy efficiency codes that the country complies with, and then vertically you will see how many of the 18 Global South countries implement a particular requirement. Next slide. Antara, if you can confirm that this plays automatically.
Yes.
So here we have a geographic overview, or the SLI map, and it indicates the quantitative energy efficiency criteria of those 18 Global South countries. It allows for ease of information and comparison. As indicated on the slide, the map is interactive. For example, and this is what the slide showcases, if you want more detailed information of the compulsory U values of walls in South Africa, it is possible to use the slide map, and through this map, it will provide this information with relative ease. We can move to the next slide. Now we get to what is the structure of the BEEC's decision-making prototype. And this is actually the most important part of the webinar, where Tariené will delve into the prototype that she developed and exactly how it functions. Tariené, over to you. We move to the next slide, Antara, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining and being here. I will now move on to the amalgamation of this information that we just shared and what we would call the new proposed Global South SLIM prototype. And this research product is a proposed new model that we call now the Sustainable Level Indicators Model, Matrix and Maps, therefore SLIM to the power of 3. So this new Global South model was developed to create an interactive online database, which is expected to serve as a decision-making framework for Global South countries that do not currently have any building energy codes. So currently there is an interactive prototype and an online platform, but it is in development stages. And as explained earlier, this Sustainable Level Indicators Matrix Model and Map platform uses a taxonomy with inheritance hierarchy to filter information. Next slide, please. So the SLIM 3 prototype includes general information on each country, and this includes the country name, region, some background on the building energy code, the name thereof, the year, length, language, and even the governing body of the building code. In this model, there are 4 developmental stages of the prototype, and these stages are used during the user interface. So when we look at stage 1, which is at the bottom of that Excel tab, the first section of the filter provides information on countries' building energy code status. And these include the implementation, stating whether it's mandatory, which is full mandatory for the whole built environment, whether they're partial codes, voluntary codes, whether it's in development, or whether there aren't any available. The second stage is the second filter, which uses the climatic conditions, which is defined by the Köppen-Geiger climate classification system. And this is to identify similar countries, similar climatic conditions between the Global South countries. This feature also allows users to now filter their options according to the climatic conditions of their preferred location. And then the result is obviously a comprehensive list of this Global South countries that share similar characteristics. In stage 3, the filter uses then the HOBEF, the slime model, and the matrix as the basis. And the users can now decide on a hierarchy level from 1 to 4, and this includes those systems, the subsystems, components, and other elements that are identified within the building energy codes. And the filter then identifies other Global South countries that include the same selection criteria that you identified. And at the last stage, the user can now gain access to very detailed quantitative data with specific values during the last stage. And the tool will provide the data ranges of the building energy code in respect of the respective building energy code. So this SLIM3 tool now compares the prescriptive requirements of various countries. And if we go to the next slide, I will do a practical example of South Africa. And this is a country that has compulsory building energy codes. So when we look at this, the start button is what launches the SLIM3 tool as indicated by the red circle. So once you click onto that, it will take you to the next page. You can please skip, going on to the first stage. If we can please go to the next slide. So that button takes you to the second page, which is stage 1, which will allow users to select countries based on their building energy code status. So this slide shows that it's filtering countries according to the status, which the first step is just whether a country has building energy codes or not. And this is within the population of the 57 Global South countries. Next slide, please. This slide highlights the filter with the red circle, filtering countries that have, again, mandatory building energy codes for their entire built environment. And this identified 18 countries. What's important to state is that for the study, we had to delineate countries. However, this tool can be further expanded upon in the future to include other codes as well. Next slide, please. Here we can see after clicking on that filter, it delineated the countries down to only those 18 countries in the Global South that have full mandatory codes indicated by the filter. If you click next, we go to the next tab as well, please. And this shows stage 2 of the filter. And during this second stage, you can now select one or more of the available Köppen-Geiger climate zones of the specific country. So we are looking at South Africa, as is highlighted. And I want to say specifically look at the BWH climate zone for South Africa, also indicated by the red circle. To identify other countries that have similar conditions within that arid climate zone. Next slide, please. You will see that it has now filtered down all countries with the same BWH climate that I was looking for. And it identified 10 Global South countries and 3 UAE districts that share this similar climatic zone. Next slide, please. Upon clicking next, we go to the third stage, where all the 10 countries are with the same climatic conditions. And now the tool allows the user to filter the information according to the specific building component. And these components include U values of walls, floors, roofs, glazing performance, ventilation, lighting, and other components, which could include solar. For this case study, I decided to select the filter of U values, as indicated again by the red circle. And once you filter that down, you can go to the next slide, please. You will see that it delineates the selection further. So now this matrix indicates all the countries that have building energy codes in a similar climatic zone that we identified, and the countries that have wall U values and data available for that. So this shows that there are now 8 countries that look at wall U values and have energy codes. When we move on to the next slide, please, we can see that just before going to stage 4, the user can now decide whether they want to use this tool for either design purposes or to evaluate their current building energy codes by comparing codes with the other countries. So the two options are the user can now select the specific value criteria of South Africa as indicated by the red rectangle, or the user will then access detailed quantitative data, values, and technical specifications. The user, which could be a South African built environment practitioner, can also now use this information to ensure that the building design conforms with the required U values. Alternatively, the user can select another Global South country that have wall U values within its codes. So, for instance, I decided to choose Kuwait, which is indicated in the blue square, as such an example. And now the user can use the prescribed wall U values of the codes of Kuwait. And a South African regulatory authority can also compare these different requirements to either develop, but South Africa has codes, or rather to improve the current building energy codes of South Africa. So if we go to the next slide, we click on Kuwait. This is now stage 4, where we can see the slide indicating the results that we obtained from selecting wall U values and seeing what current energy efficiency criteria Kuwait uses within the same climate conditions. All the technical specifications are summarized there, and page numbers are also provided in the comment box for you to further look up if necessary. So this is an example of a country that have codes that want to check it just for ease of access, whether their own design, or to check against other countries and how strict their regulations are. I would please like to move to the next slide, where we look at Angola as a case study. And this is an example of a country that do not have any codes. So we'll start with the same thing, where the start button launches this tool. The tool also has additional information and step-by-step information on how to use the tool. So if we click on start, it will take us to the next tab. Next one, please. And we go again to the first stage. Now here we're back at the status of the building energy codes of 57 Global South countries. And again, by the red square, it is a red circle, it is indicated what the status is. However, at this stage, we do not want to filter, as we want to identify countries without codes. So the first one, if we can just move to the next slide, please. I have identified Angola as a country you can see marked with red without any building energy efficiency codes. And this also means that they don't currently have any partial codes, non-voluntary codes, anything at all. Again, we don't want to filter, which in the previous one we would have. We want to keep Angola on the list in order to compare them during the second stage. If we move to the next slide, please. So during the second stage, we can now select one or more, again, of the available Copenhagen climate zones of the country that we chose. And in this case study, I looked at the various climate zones of Angola and decided to delineate the filter for all 5 of its climate types, not just specifically one. If we go next, please, we can see that the first climate zone or type that I delineated was the AW, which is the pinkish one, in order to identify countries with the same climatic conditions. Next, please. Then the second one, you will see that Angola has BWH climate zone as a second filter. And then the third climate zone is BSH, which you can see is the 10 countries that are delineated already is included in those climatic types. The next one, please. As you see, we go every stage, the delineation, it delineates more and more. And the fourth climate type is CWA. Again, I've highlighted them there with red circles. And we can see that it's narrowed down the search to 4 countries. And the final climate zone, again, is CWB, as previously seen. And the 4 identified countries already have this climate zone narrowed down. Next page, please. So this slide shows the filtered countries according to the climatic types that is similar to Angola. However, we want to find countries, again, that have full mandatory codes to use as a guideline. And we can see from this image that although India and Mexico both indicate that they have codes, it is only Mexico that has full mandatory codes for their entire built environment sector. And they were included as part of the initial study. Next slide, please. Then we move on again to the third stage. And now this is where users can once again filter the information according to a specific building component. And again, I chose to go with wall U values. They're all there, whether it's glazing, ventilation, but I decided to go for wall U values. And as I mentioned, you'll see there that while India currently does not have information, this is because they have partial codes, and we can expand on this in the future to include those countries' codes as well. Next slide, please. So at this stage, again, you can see that the tool can be used for design purposes or to develop your own set of building energy codes. And by clicking on the U value button of Mexico, whether it's for residential or commercial, it will allow you to access the detailed quantitative data, values, and technical specifications. So if we click on that, we can go to the next page. And this is where it takes you to stage 4 again, where you will see the quantitative results from the U values. And Mexico provides more than one code, depending on the building typology, and it can be accessed separately. So this slim tool provides a summarized version of the requirements of the codes. And then again, page numbers for the codes are provided within the comment boxes. So as a result, you, the user, whether it be a built environment practitioner, designer, architect from, say, Angola, can now use this information to ensure that your building design confirms with other Global South building energy codes and the U values that they use within their codes, in order just to ensure that you have a more energy efficient design. Or you or a regulatory authority within Angola can use this tool to compare it, like I just did, with different requirements, and then be able to develop your own set of building energy codes, not just taking from Global North codes, which is a common practice, but rather from Global South examples that are climatically suited specifically for a country, and specifically in this example for Angola. Next slide, please. So in short, that is how the tool functions and how it works. And I will hand over back to Professor Laubscher to summarize and conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Tariené. If we are on the summary slide now, you'll see that the SLIM 3 tool is based on 4 stages. Stage 1 focuses on the mandatory, partial, or voluntary implementation of BEECs. Stage 2 reviews the representation of the Global South countries in the 5 climatic zones and 31 types of the Copenhagen climate classification system. Stage 3 then considers pertinent energy efficiency criteria, the technical specifications, requirements, and properties of these. And then stage 4 concentrates on the performance criteria of the identified 18 countries. If we could move to the next slide. So in conclusion, the significance of the Global South is not only attributed to the projected increase in building stock by 2050, its anticipated rise in CO2 emissions, and the intensifying energy use in the building sector. It is also about the growing frequency of natural disasters and the expanding number of vulnerable and impoverished communities in the Global South. The research indicated only 18 Global South countries have mandatory building energy efficiency codes across all their built environment sectors. And this status presents significant challenges for the region, and the SLIM3 tool can help address these challenges. We think that the SLIM3 tool should be further developed to improve its environmental and energy efficiency. And this could be done by evaluating its effectiveness for each country, by incorporating additional contextual appropriate energy efficiency measures, and most importantly, by ensuring the existing codes on which SLIM3 are based are kept up to date. Next slide. We'd like to extend an invitation to you to get involved. You're welcome to visit the website, for which there's a QR code now. Antara will also share our slide notes. As Tariené had said earlier, please note that the website is still under development. We encourage you to use the contribution tab to upload the latest versions of BEECs that are relevant to your specific environments. But if you're struggling, you're welcome to email us. We could go to the next slide. I'd like to thank the audience for attending this webinar. We appreciate everyone's presence today. And then in particular, Tariené, Henk, and I would like to thank Jacques, Cornish, Ursula, and also Antara for making this possible. We really appreciate that. You were willing to assist us to showcase the work that we've been doing. Thank you. Next slide. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Laubscher, Dr. Tariené, as well as Professor Henk. I see we have a couple of questions in the chat, which is amazing. So I'm going to read out the question. First question is from Judy. And the question is, does the tool take into account how old the BEECs are in the 18 Global South countries? For example, when was Mexico's mandatory code developed and implemented? So whoever wants to step up, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Tariené, perhaps you could assist here.
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, it does take into account, it just gives information about the tool and when it was first implemented or published. However, a lot of them are also old energy codes and they were still used because the Global South don't have a lot of countries with codes. So therefore, it also can be used to update those codes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Tariené. We also have a question from Solomon. Is there any consideration of embodied greenhouse gas emissions that may be associated with compliance to codes?
Perhaps I'll respond here, Kunish. Code compliance in the Global South is challenging. We should acknowledge